Man finds lion on the brink of death. The animal's reaction stuns the world. Damn it, what's that? Lucas yelled, his breath misting in the frigid air as his flashlight beam sliced through the dense undergrowth. His heart pounded against his ribs as he thrust aside the branches, revealing a sight that made it stop. Simba, the magnificent lion of the reserve, lay dying, his golden fur matted with blood, a deep wound on his hind leg where an iron bear trap had cruelly ensnared him. Simba, what happened to you? Lucas choked out, his voice trembling as he knelt a few feet from the fading beast, his hand already gripping his radio. To find out what happens next in this incredible encounter and witness the astonishing reaction that amazed the world, make sure you subscribe, like our content, and listen to the full story. The air in the small, screened-off enclosure was thick with the metallic tang of blood, antiseptic, and the musky, surprisingly delicate scent of the lion. Lucas hadn't slept in what felt like days, only catnapping in a chair dragged close to the temporary cage. His eyes burned, his back ached, but he couldn't leave, not yet. Not when the massive tawny body on the straw bedding still rose and fell with such shallow, ragged breaths. He'd done all he could. Hannah, the regional vet, had been a miracle worker, her small, capable hands flying over torn flesh and shattered bone. But even she'd offered little hope after the initial, frantic hours of surgery under the harsh glare of a portable lamp. The infection is rampant. Lucas, the blood loss. It's too much for a wild animal already weakened by the snare. A soft groan, a mere exhalation of pain, pulled him from his exhausted thoughts. The lion's great head, no longer regal, but pathetically lolling, shifted, one golden eye clouded with pain and the lingering effects of the sedative, cracked open. It wasn't the glazed, unfocused stare he'd seen for the past 2 days. This was different. There was a flicker, a spark of something ancient and aware, focusing directly on him. Lucas froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Every instinct, honed by years in the African bush, screamed at him to back away. This was a wounded apex predator, cornered and in agony, a deadly combination. He was too close, but he didn't move. He couldn't. The lion, Tao, as he'd already begun to call him in his mind, let out another sigh, a sound that seemed to carry an impossible weight of suffering. Then, with an effort that made his massive frame tremble, Tao lifted his head just an inch. His gaze remained locked on Lucas. Slowly, painstakingly, the lion extended a paw, not in aggression, not with claws bared, but softly, almost tentatively. It stopped inches from Lucas's knee, which was pressed against the wire mesh of the enclosure. Lucas held his breath. The world seemed to shrink to this tiny space, this impossible moment. Was this delirium? A trick of his exhausted mind? Then, the lion did something that shattered every notion Lucas held about the wild creatures he'd dedicated his life to studying. Tao nudged his huge, battered head against the wire mesh, directly in line with Lucas's hand, which rested there. A soft, rumbling sound, too weak to be a growl, too profound to be a simple exhalation, vibrated through the air. It was a sound Lucas had never heard, yet it resonated deep within his own bruised soul. He stared, his mind reeling. What was happening? A dying lion, a creature of instinct and raw power, offering what? Comfort, recognition. He didn't understand. He only knew that in that moment, something profound and inexplicable was passing between them, a fragile bridge across an unbridgeable chasm. He felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to reach out, to touch the scarred head, but fear and disbelief held him captive. The moment stretched, timeless and terrifying. Before the great head sagged, the eye closed, and the shallow breathing resumed. Lucas finally exhaled, a ragged gasp. His hand was shaking. What in God's name had just happened? 2 days earlier, the African sun had been a merciless hammer over the parched plains of the Linyante Conservancy. Dr. Lucas Alastair, a 45-year-old wildlife biologist and photographer, hadn't intended to be this far into the western sector. His research, a long-term study on lion pride dynamics, usually kept him closer to the permanent water sources of the river. But reports of unusual hyena activity and a disquieting silence from the area where the nomadic Matla pride usually roamed had drawn him off his usual route. Lucas was a man shaped by loss. 5 years ago, a sudden illness had claimed his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter, Emily, within weeks of each other, leaving a void in his life so vast it had nearly consumed him. He'd thrown himself into his work with a desperate intensity, finding a fragile solace in the raw, uncompromising beauty of the African wilderness. The animals, with their straightforward existence, their battles for survival, offered a clarity that the human world, with its complexities and cruelties, no longer could. He understood them, or at least he thought he did. The Conservancy was a sprawling, underfunded territory, a patchwork of acacia woodland, open savanna, and dense mopane scrub. It was a haven for wildlife, but also a prime target for increasingly sophisticated poaching syndicates. Lucas, often working alone for weeks, had stumbled upon their brutal handiwork before. The mutilated rhino carcass, the telltale glint of a discarded wire snare, each discovery was a fresh stab of grief and rage. That afternoon, as his battered Land Rover rattled over the uneven terrain, a flicker of unnatural movement in a thicket of thorny acacia had caught his eye. It wasn't the fluid grace of a healthy animal. It was a desperate, jerky thrashing, followed by a sound that chilled him to the bone, a low, guttural moan of pure agony. He grabbed his binoculars, his heart already sinking. The image that swam into focus was horrifying. A magnificent male lion, its tawny coat matted with dirt and dried blood, was ensnared. A heavy-gauge cable, the kind favored by poachers for its brutal efficiency, was cinched tight around its right hind leg, cutting deep into the flesh. The surrounding earth was torn up, testament to a long and terrible struggle. The lion was exhausted, its breathing shallow, its eyes already dulling. "No," Lucas whispered, his voice hoarse. He recognized the lion. It was the dominant male of the Matla pride, a truly majestic animal he'd photographed many times, an animal he'd mentally nicknamed Tao, the lion. He was known for his impressive black mane and his calm, confident demeanor. Seeing him like this, reduced to a suffering, trapped creature, felt like a personal blow. This was the inciting incident. Lucas knew the risks. Approaching a snared, wounded lion was suicidal for most. The Conservancy's protocol was clear report. Wait for the armed ranger unit and the vet. But the nearest ranger station was hours away, and Hannah Olson, the sole vet for an area the size of a small country, could be anywhere. Tao didn't have hours. He was dying. Every fiber of his being, every instinct for self-preservation screamed at him to follow protocol. But then he saw Tao's eyes, the faint spark of life still flickering there, and the image of Sarah and Emily, their faces pale and drawn in their final days, flashed through his mind. He couldn't just stand by and watch another life extinguish itself in agony. "Hang on, Tao," he muttered, his decision made. Hang on. Damn it. He grabbed his emergency medical kit, his tranquilizer rifle, loaded with a dart he prayed was potent enough, and his heavy-duty wire cutters. His hands were surprisingly steady as he checked the rifle. He had to be precise. Too little sedative, and Tao would be a raging, mortally wounded threat. Too much, and he'd simply hasten the inevitable. He took a deep breath, the scorching air burning his lungs, and began the perilous approach. The rescue, and whatever followed, had begun. The fate of the lion, and perhaps a part of Lucas's own fractured soul, hung precariously in the balance. The sedative dart hit Tao's massive shoulder with a soft thud. The lion roared, a sound of pure fury and pain, and lunged against the snare, the cable biting even deeper. Lucas held his ground, heart pounding, rifle ready for a follow-up shot if needed. But the drug was potent. Within minutes, Tao's struggles lessened, his roars fading to agonized groans, and finally, his great head sank to the dust. Lucas approached with extreme caution, his senses on high alert. Even sedated, a lion of this size was immensely dangerous. The snare was brutal, a thick, greased steel cable embedded deep into the muscle and sinew of Tao's hind leg. The surrounding tissue was mangled, already showing signs of angry inflammation. Flies buzzed incessantly around the wound. Working frantically against the fading daylight, Lucas used the heavy-duty cutters. The cable was tough, designed to hold against the desperate struggles of a powerful animal. Sweat poured down his face, stinging his eyes. Each snap of the cutter sent a jolt through his arms. Finally, with a loud crack, the last strand gave way. The leg was a mess. The snare had cut almost to the bone. He knew, with a sickening certainty, that Tao would likely lose the leg if he even survived the infection that was undoubtedly already raging. He cleaned the wound as best he could with antiseptic from his kit, his touch surprisingly gentle. He poured precious water from his canteen onto the lion's parched tongue, watching the faint flicker of its eyelashes. He managed to get a satellite call through to Hannah Olson, the Conservancy vet. Her voice was strained when she finally answered. "Lucas, what is it?" "I'm in the middle of a rhino calf relocation, miles from anywhere." He quickly explained the situation. "Hannah, he's bad, really bad. Snare, deep, possible fracture. He needs you." There was a pause. "A full-grown male. Lucas, you know the chances?" and I can't get there before morning, maybe midday if I'm lucky. You're on your own until then. What do I do? Lucas asked, the desperation raw in his voice. Keep him sedated if he wakes and becomes aggressive, but be careful with the dosage. Try to keep the wound clean. Keep him hydrated if you can. And Lucas, be prepared. Most don't make it from something like this. The night was a blur of anxiety. Lucas stayed with Tao, dozing fitfully in his vehicle, parked a safe distance away, but close enough to hear any change in the lion's breathing. He resedated Tao once when the lion began to thrash and moan, the drug-induced sleep a temporary reprieve from the agony. He found more signs of poachers, discarded cigarette packs of a foreign brand, fresh boot prints. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was organized. Hannah arrived late the next morning, her ancient Land Cruiser groaning to a halt. She was a woman in her late 50s, wiry and weathered, with eyes that had seen too much suffering but still held a fierce compassion. She took one look at Tao and whistled softly. He's a magnificent beast. And you, Lucas Alastair, are either the bravest man I know or the craziest. Together, they worked. Hannah's skill was undeniable. She cleaned and debrided the horrific wound, her movements precise and efficient despite the primitive conditions. The bone is chipped, not a clean break, thankfully, but the tissue damage, sepsis, is the big enemy now. She administered powerful antibiotics and pain medication via IV, Lucas assisting, holding limbs, passing instruments, his earlier fatigue forgotten in the adrenaline of the moment. We need to move him, Hannah said finally, wiping sweat from her brow. He can't stay out here, too vulnerable. Your research camp, isn't it nearby? You have that old quarantine enclosure, don't you? Lucas nodded. It was a sturdy, chain-link structure he'd used years ago for a hyena study. Getting a 400-pound, semi-conscious lion onto a makeshift tarpaulin stretcher and then into the back of Hannah's cruiser was a Herculean task that left them both gasping and soaked in sweat. The next few days were critical. Tao hovered between life and death. His fever spiked dangerously. The wound, despite Hannah's diligent care and Lucas's constant attention, oozed pus. Hannah came as often as she could, sometimes staying overnight, sharing Lucas's meager supplies and strong coffee. She was a pragmatist, constantly reminding Lucas of the grim odds. Don't get too attached. Lucas, she warned gently one evening, noticing the way he spoke to the unconscious lion, the soft tone he used. I'm just trying to keep him alive, Lucas retorted, perhaps a little too sharply, but he knew she was right. He was getting attached. Tao, in his vulnerable state, had become a focal point for all the care and concern Lucas had buried deep within himself. He spent hours just sitting by the enclosure, sometimes reading aloud from an old poetry book Sarah had loved, the sound of his voice a low murmur in the quiet of the bush. He meticulously documented Tao's progress, or lack thereof, in his research journal, the entries becoming less scientific, more personal. Then came the moment described in Part 1, the faint groan, the opening of the eye, the astonishing, deliberate extension of the paw, the gentle nudge of the head against the wire. It wasn't a plea for food or an aggressive posture. It felt like contact, acknowledgement. Lucas didn't tell Hannah about it immediately. It felt too personal, too strange. He thought he might have imagined it, a product of exhaustion and wishful thinking. But a few days later, as Tao slowly began to show signs of improvement, his fever receding, a spark of interest in the water Lucas offered, something else happened. Lucas was cleaning the enclosure, a careful, slow process, always keeping the mesh between them. Tao was lying down, watching him with those incredible golden eyes, no longer clouded by pain, but alert and unnervingly intelligent. Lucas dropped a cleaning brush. As he bent to retrieve it, he stumbled slightly. Tao let out a low, soft woof, a sound almost like a dog's concerned bark. He even half rose, a protective motion, before settling back down. Lucas stared. Lions didn't woof. They roared, they growled, they snarled. But this was different. This was communication. He started talking to Tao more, not just reading. He told him about his day, about the other animals he'd seen, about the stars at night. Tao would often watch him, his ears twitching, sometimes letting out those soft, rumbling vocalizations that vibrated in Lucas's chest. The bond, improbable and fragile, was strengthening. He was no longer just a scientist observing a subject. He was a man connecting with another living being in a way he hadn't thought possible. The stakes were no longer just about Tao's survival. They were about this inexplicable connection, this flicker of understanding in a world that had often felt devoid of it. And the poachers were still out there. The recovered Tao would be a living testament to their failed attempt, a loose end they might want to tie up. Nearly 3 weeks after the rescue, Tao was a shadow of his former regal self, but he was undeniably on the mend. His massive frame was leaner, his magnificent black mane a little duller, and he favored his injured hind leg heavily. The wound, now a puckered, angry scar that Hannah confirmed would leave him with a permanent limp. Yet his eyes burned with a renewed vitality, and he was eating solid food, chunks of game meat Lucas laboriously sourced and delivered. The quarantine enclosure at Lucas's remote research camp had become Tao's temporary kingdom. Lucas had reinforced it, creating a small shaded area and ensuring a constant supply of fresh water. His days now revolved around Tao's care, cleaning the enclosure, providing food, monitoring his health, and, most surprisingly, their silent and sometimes not so silent interactions. Tao would often greet him with that soft, rumbling chuff, a sound that never failed to send a shiver down Lucas's spine, not of fear, but of something akin to awe. He would sit by the mesh, and Tao would lie parallel on the other side, sometimes just inches away, their proximity a testament to an unspoken trust. The turning point came unexpectedly, not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a quiet revelation that shifted everything. Hannah had driven out for what she hoped would be one of her final checkups on Tao. She watched, arms crossed, as Lucas approached the enclosure. Tao, who had been dozing in a patch of sun, lifted his head and let out that distinctive, soft vocalization. He then rose slowly and limped towards Lucas, stopping at the wire. He didn't rub against it this time, but simply stood, looking at Lucas with an unnerving intensity. Lucas spoke to him quietly, his voice calm and familiar. "Hey there, big guy. Feeling better today?" Tao blinked slowly, then did something Hannah had never witnessed in her 30 years as a wildlife vet. He lowered his head in a distinct, deliberate movement, almost like a bow, before letting out a series of soft, breathy huffs directly towards Lucas. Hannah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Lucas, what was that?" Lucas turned, a hesitant smile on his face. He does that sometimes. It's his way of saying hello. I think saying hello. Hannah walked closer, her gaze fixed on the lion, who now lay down again, his eyes still on Lucas. "Lucas, lions don't say hello like that." That was deference, recognition. I've seen it between subordinate lions and a pride leader, but never, ever towards a human. She examined Tao, who tolerated her presence with a surprising calmness, though his attention remained primarily on Lucas. "His leg is healing as well as we could hope," she finally announced, stowing her equipment. "He'll always have that limp. Probably won't be able to hunt with the same prowess. He won't be able to lead a pride again. Not effectively." Lucas felt a pang of sadness for the lion's lost reign. "But," Hannah continued, her eyes thoughtful, "he's a survivor, and there's something extraordinary happening here. Lucas, this bond, it's more than just habituation to a food source." That evening, after Hannah had left, Lucas sat by the enclosure, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Tao was quiet, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "She's right, you know," Lucas murmured, more to himself than the lion. "You're not like other lions, are you?" As if in response, Tao turned his head and looked directly at him, and for a fleeting moment, Lucas felt an almost human understanding in those golden depths. It was a look that said, "We are connected." This was the true shift. It wasn't just about saving an animal anymore. It was about understanding and protecting something unique. Lucas, who had been reactive, focused solely on Tao's physical recovery, now felt a different, more profound responsibility. This lion, with his inexplicable awareness, his capacity for connection, deserved more than just survival. He deserved a future where his unique nature was acknowledged and safeguarded. The point of no return arrived a few days later. While checking the perimeter of his camp, Lucas found fresh spoor, not animal, but human. 2 sets of boot prints, recent, and close to the track leading to his camp. They weren't Hannah's. His blood ran cold. The poachers, had they seen Hannah's vehicle, heard rumors of a recovering lion? They might not just be after any lion. They might be specifically looking for the one that got away, the one that could potentially lead investigators back to them if it was found with their distinctive snare still attached or the wound clearly identifiable. Lucas realized with chilling clarity that Tao wasn't just a recovering animal. He was a witness, and his own camp, once a haven, was now a potential target. He was no longer just a caregiver. He was a protector. He had to think beyond Tao's immediate health. He had to think about long-term safety, about the forces that would see Tao only as a trophy or a threat. And he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would do whatever it took to protect this extraordinary creature who had, in some strange way, begun to heal him too. The story of Tao and his incredible capacity for connection could no longer remain a secret, shared only with Hannah. It was too important, but sharing it also meant inviting danger. The discovery of the boot prints galvanized Lucas. The quiet solitude of his research camp now felt menacing. Every rustle of leaves, every distant snap of a twig sending his nerves jangling. He began carrying his heavy caliber rifle everywhere, not just for Tao's protection, but for his own. The poachers were clearly professionals, and they wouldn't appreciate loose ends or witnesses. His first call was to Ben Carter, the head of security for the Linyanti Conservancy. Carter was an ex-military man, hardened and cynical, but dedicated. "Lucas, what's up? You sound spooked." Lucas quickly detailed the discovery of Tao, the snare, the lion's unusual recovery, and now the fresh tracks. "I think they know he's here, Ben, or they're scouting to see if he survived." There was a grim silence on the other end. "Damn! We've had intel about a new crew operating in your sector. Nasty bastards, well-equipped. That snare sounds like their signature. A live lion that escaped them. They won't like that. It's a point of pride and a risk." "What are my options?" Lucas asked. "Officially, we try to arrange a capture and relocation to a secure facility. But that takes time. Resources we barely have. Unofficially, you're isolated. If they come, you're the first line of defense." Carter paused. "This lion, you said it's the big male from the Matla Pride, the one with the black mane." "Yes, that's him. Tao, he's a legend around here. Lucas, if word gets out he's alive but crippled, and that he's tame." Lucas bristled. "He's not tame. He's different. Different enough that it might be his death sentence if the wrong people find out. Or a meal ticket for someone else," Carter said grimly. "Keep your head down. I'll see if I can divert a patrol your way, but don't count on it being quick." Lucas knew he couldn't just wait. Tao's presence, once a source of quiet wonder, now felt like a dangerous secret. He had to make a decision about the lion's future, and fast. Releasing him back into the wild with his pronounced limp and no pride to support him was a death sentence. A zoo or a typical sanctuary felt like a betrayal of his wild spirit. Hannah, when he consulted her, was practical. "There's a private reserve a few hundred kilometers south. Well-funded, excellent security. Specializing in lions that can't be reintegrated, they have vast natural enclosures. He'd be safe there. He could live out his days in peace." "And what about this connection?" Lucas asked, struggling to articulate the depth of what he felt. "Will they understand him?" Hannah looked at him, her expression softening. "Lucas, what you have with Tao is a 1 in a billion phenomenon. You can't expect others to replicate it, but you can ensure he's safe and respected. And maybe, just maybe, his story can do some good." This sparked an idea, the world-amazing aspect. If Tao's story, his incredible capacity for interspecies connection, could be told, it could highlight the sentience of these animals, the devastation of poaching, and the importance of conservation in a way that dry statistics never could. But it was a double-edged sword. Publicity could also attract the wrong kind of attention. He decided to take a calculated risk. He contacted a trusted wildlife journalist, Eleanor Vance, someone known for her sensitive and impactful reporting. He sent her a carefully worded email, hinting at an extraordinary story of survival and interspecies connection, without giving away too many specifics or his exact location. Eleanor responded almost immediately. Her interest piqued. "Lucas, this sounds incredible and potentially very important, but also dangerous for you and the animal if not handled correctly." While waiting for Eleanor's potential arrival, Lucas faced increasing pressure. One evening, a vehicle approached his camp. Not Carter's men, two figures, silhouetted against the headlights, unfamiliar. They didn't come to the main hut, but circled wide, their movements furtive. Lucas, hidden in the shadows with his rifle, watched them survey the area near Tao's enclosure. Tao, sensing the threat, let out a low, menacing growl, a sound that resonated with primal power, very different from the soft rumbles he used with Lucas. The figures, startled, retreated quickly and drove off. It was a clear warning. They knew this incident became Lucas's dark night of the soul. He was terrified, not just for Tao, but for himself. Was he doing the right thing? Was he putting Tao in more danger by keeping him, by thinking his story could change anything? He sat by Tao's enclosure late into the night, the lion a comforting, solid presence on the other side of the wire. "What do I do, Tao?" he whispered into the darkness. The lion, as if understanding, rested his great head near the mesh, his warm breath ghosting over Lucas's hand. In that moment of quiet connection, Lucas found his resolve again. He wouldn't let fear dictate his actions. Tao's story needed to be told. Eleanor Vance arrived 2 days later, discreetly, in an unmarked vehicle driven by a contact Carter had quietly arranged. She was a sharp, perceptive woman in her early 40s, her eyes missing nothing. Lucas introduced her to Tao from a safe distance at first. The lion watched her with his usual intelligent gaze, but made no move towards her. When Lucas approached the enclosure, however, Tao rose and came to the wire, giving his customary soft chuff and rubbing his head against the mesh near Lucas's hand. Eleanor watched, mesmerized, her camera clicking softly. I've never seen anything like it," she breathed, her journalistic skepticism momentarily forgotten. "He truly knows you, trusts you." Over the next few days, Eleanor documented everything: Tao's recovery, his interactions with Lucas, the evidence of the poaching attempt. Lucas found himself opening up, sharing not just the facts, but the emotional journey, the profound impact Tao had had on his life. The plan began to form. Eleanor would prepare her story. Simultaneously, with Carter's covert assistance, they would arrange Tao's transport to the Southern Reserve. The story would break after Tao was safe. It would be a story of hope, of resilience, but also a stark reminder of the threats these animals faced. The tension was palpable. Every day felt borrowed. The poachers could return at any moment, more determined this time. Lucas barely slept, his senses heightened, constantly scanning the bush. He knew the climax was approaching, the final act of ensuring Tao's safety and sharing his extraordinary existence with the world was about to unfold, fraught with peril and the potential for either a miraculous success or a devastating failure. The day of Tao's transport arrived cloaked in the pre-dawn gloom, a sliver of moon offering little light. Ben Carter himself drove the large, covered truck, modified for animal transport, accompanied by two of his most trusted rangers. Eleanor Vance was there, camera ready, her expression a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Lucas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was it. Sedating Tao again was a wrenching necessity. As Lucas prepared the dart, Tao watched him, a flicker of something unreadable in his golden eyes. "It's okay, old friend," Lucas murmured, his voice thick with emotions. "This is for the best, a new home, a safe place." The dart found its mark, and slowly, the magnificent lion succumbed to the drug, his head resting on his paws. The transfer to the transport crate was tense and physically demanding. Even sedated, Tao was an immense weight. Lucas found himself working alongside Carter and his rangers, his muscles straining, his focus absolute. Once Tao was secured inside the crate, a heavy silence fell over the small group. As the truck rumbled slowly away from the research camp, Lucas felt a profound sense of emptiness. The enclosure, Tao's temporary kingdom, now stood stark and vacant. He was doing the right thing, he knew, but the silence was deafening. Eleanor placed a comforting hand on his arm. "He'll be safe, Lucas, and his story, it will make a difference." They had driven barely 10 kilometers when one of Carter's rangers, riding shotgun, suddenly shouted, "Vehicle approaching." Fast, no lights. Carter swore, his hand instinctively going to the heavy-duty pistol holstered at his hip. Poachers. They must have been watching, waiting for us to move him. A battered pickup truck, its engine roaring, burst from the bush, cutting them off. 3 men, armed with AK-47s, leaped out, their faces grim and determined. "Stop the vehicle." "Out!" One of them yelled, his weapon leveled. Lucas's blood ran cold. This was the confrontation he had dreaded. Carter, ever the professional, spoke calmly into his radio, relaying their situation and location before raising his hands. "All right, easy now. No need for anyone to get hurt." "We want the lion," the leader snarled, his eyes glinting. "The one that got away. He's our property." Lucas stepped forward, his heart pounding, but his voice surprisingly steady. "He's not property. He's a living creature, and he's under the protection of the Linyanti Conservancy." The poacher laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Conservancy. You can't even protect yourselves." He gestured with his rifle towards the back of the truck. "Open it." Suddenly, from within the transport crate, came a sound that ripped through the tense standoff, a deep, window-rattling roar. Not the pained groan of a wounded animal, but the full-throated, terrifying roar of an apex predator, asserting its dominance. Tao, the sedative. It was wearing off sooner than expected, or perhaps the adrenaline of the situation was fighting it. The poachers froze, their bravado faltering. The sheer primal fury in that roar was something no human could ignore. Then, another sound, the distinct whine of approaching sirens, growing rapidly louder. Carter's call had gotten through. The poachers exchanged panicked glances. Their easy ambush was turning into a trap. "Forget the lion. Let's go," one of them shouted. They scrambled back into their pickup, firing a few wild shots into the air as they sped away, disappearing back into the dense bush. Carter and his rangers immediately took defensive positions, but the threat had passed. Moments later, 2 Conservancy patrol vehicles, lights flashing, screeched to a halt. Lucas leaned against the truck, his legs weak with relief. He looked towards the crate where Tao was now stirring, letting out low, agitated growls. Even in his compromised state, Tao had played a part in his own rescue. The lion's sheer presence, his indomitable spirit, had been a weapon. Eleanor was already documenting the scene, her face pale, but her hands steady, all of it. The poachers were never caught that day, disappearing into the vast wilderness. But Eleanor Vance's story, when it broke a week later, caused an international sensation. The lion who roared for his rescuer, an African tale of survival and an unbreakable bond. The headline blazed across online platforms and magazine covers. Her compelling narrative, accompanied by her stunning photographs of Tao and Lucas, and the dramatic details of the attempted ambush, captivated millions. The story didn't just focus on the danger and drama. It highlighted the incredible intelligence and emotional capacity of Tao, his unique connection with Lucas, the image of the massive lion gently nudging Lucas's hand, the accounts of his soft vocalizations, the final roar that had unnerved armed poachers. These details painted a picture of an animal far more complex and sentient than many had ever imagined. Donations poured into the Linyanti Conservancy and the Southern Reserve where Tao now resided. Tao settled into his new home remarkably well. The reserve was vast. His enclosure measured in acres, not feet, complete with rocky outcrops, water holes, and acacia trees. He still limped, a permanent reminder of his ordeal, but he moved with a quiet dignity. Lucas visited him regularly. The reserve staff, initially skeptical, soon witnessed the unique bond for themselves. When Lucas approached, Tao would still emit that soft, rumbling chuff, a greeting reserved only for him. He would come to the fence line, not with the eagerness of a pet, but with the calm acknowledgement of an equal, and rest his great head there, allowing Lucas to speak to him, sometimes even to touch his scarred brow through the heavy mesh. The world was, indeed, amazed. Tao became an ambassador for his species, a symbol of both the fragility of wildlife and its incredible resilience. Documentaries were made. Research papers were written on his unique vocalizations and behaviors. The focus on Tao's story brought renewed attention to the plight of lions across Africa and the ruthless efficiency of poaching networks, leading to increased funding for anti-poaching units and greater international cooperation. For Lucas, life had irrevocably changed. The deep well of grief within him hadn't vanished, but it was no longer all-consuming. The connection with Tao had mended something broken in his soul, reigniting his passion for life and his work. He became a vocal advocate for conservation, his personal story lending a powerful authenticity to his message. He continued his research, but with a new perspective, a deeper understanding of the intricate emotional lives of the animals he studied. Sometimes standing by Tao's enclosure, watching the magnificent lion gaze out over his new domain. Lucas would think back to that desperate night by the snare, the overwhelming odds, and the fragile spark of life he'd fought so hard to save. "You saved me too, old friend," he would whisper. And though the lion couldn't understand the words, Lucas knew, with a certainty that warmed him to his core, that Tao understood the sentiment. Theirs was a story that had amazed the world, a testament to the profound and often mysterious connections that can bridge the divide between man and beast, a whisper of hope in a world that desperately needed it. The man had found a dying lion, and in saving him, had found a part of himself he thought was lost forever.